challenge.
Welcome to UN Insider. I'm Elaine Reyes at the United Nations headquarters in New York. Join us as we delve into the world's most pressing issues and learn how the people inside work toward a better future for everyone around the world.
Coming up on UN Insider.
We are witnessing a killing of civilians that is unparalleled and unprecedented in any conflict since I am Secretary General.
Confronting the world's challenges and working towards solutions.
We strive for a protection of 30% of the land, 30% of the ocean by the year 2030.
A look back at some of the biggest issues of the year with the diplomats working to address them. Next.
The 78th session of the United Nations General Assembly has been marked by a flurry of activity here at UN headquarters. Diplomats are working to find solutions for some of the biggest global challenges, from armed conflicts to the climate crisis and efforts to eliminate poverty and ensure equality.
2023 has not been an easy one for those working here at the United Nations. A raging conflict in Ukraine, and more recently, the devastating fighting between Hamas and Israel.
We are witnessing a killing of civilians that is unparalleled and unprecedented in any conflict since I am Secretary General.
An unfolding humanitarian crisis in Gaza, but there are other challenges too, like the Sustainable Development Goals that the UN says are woefully off track.
Today, only 15% of the targets are on track, and many are going in reverse.
Meanwhile, several African countries are calling for an end to UN peacekeeping missions.
We are today at an important crossroads in the relationship between the United Nations and the DRC.
And once again, the issue of the veto vote has been raised in these walls, with several intergovernmental negotiations taking place this year, debating the equitable representation in the membership of the Security Council.
Abolishing the veto and stopping the abuse of the veto inside the UN Security Council, particularly in situations where atrocities are happening, is the number one most urgent reform that the UN desperately needs.
The world's humanitarian needs are many. Nearly 300 million people require assistance next year, says the UN, due to conflicts, climate emergencies, and economic factors. There was encouraging news at the United Nations this year. A new malaria vaccine has been approved by the World Health Organization, and a high-level international coordinated approach to improve pandemic prevention and preparedness was adopted. There also has been progress made in fighting climate change, despite an increase in global warming. The United Nations remains a beacon of hope and resilience for the international community. But for some, its existence is somewhat irrelevant. But as one UN expert I spoke to put it, if not the United Nations, then who? Jody Jacobs, CGTN, New York.
On this episode, we take a look back at some of the key issues of this session. We start with Akeem Steiner, UN Development Program Administrator.
Mr. Steiner, thank you so much for joining us.
Pleasure to be with you.
Let's begin with the triple whammy of COVID, climate change, and conflict around the world that has erased many of the achievements against poverty alleviation. Developing countries, as we know, have been especially hit hard. So what is UNDP doing to address some of that and to also bring it back in line?
Well, you mentioned three major crises that were not really expected, certainly not in this magnitude. One that you have not explicitly mentioned is also the fiscal crisis, because on the back of the pandemic, on the back of now an economic and financial crisis and debt crisis for many countries, the biggest challenge is how do countries that have no fiscal resources left, how do they invest in coming out of this crisis? We have examined 95 countries together with their stakeholders and governments on how they are responding. Development is about moving forward. Development is about addressing poverty, but also investing in, for example, digital public infrastructure, because this is one of the greatest drivers right now of progress and recovery.
China has put a lot of emphasis on sustainable development in programs like the Belt and Road Initiative, now celebrating 10 years. And the Global Development Initiative, how has China impacted the push to achieve the SDGs, and what can other countries learn from China?
Many people in today's world do not know that China has, over the last 35 years, with its deliberate and targeted development policies, not only become an industrial power, if you want, but also lifted over 700 million people out of poverty. This is an extraordinary achievement, and I think it is one that in many developing countries is being studied today as what is it that enabled China to do that? And I think that alone is something that has also influenced the way that many developing countries now look to China as a potential partner. So when China began to invest in the Belt and Road Initiative and more recently articulated the Global Development Initiative, I think it was in the minds of many a welcome signal to invest in the development of others.
Mr. Joachim Steiner, thank you so much for joining us.
Thank you.
This was a key year for the Sustainable Development Goals. World leaders recommitted to the goals during the General Assembly's high-level week in September. We spoke with Bolivian President Luis Arce about his country's sustainable development priorities. This year, there's a special focus on renewing the UN's Sustainable Development Goals. We're only 7 years away till 2030. What is on your priority list, and where do you see Bolivia right now in achieving some of your most important goals?
Well, we are developing a different kind of policy now in Bolivia. We are industrializing the country. So we need capital investments, we need technology, and that's why we have many agreements with Chinese companies, Russian companies, and many other world companies that they can come to Bolivia, industrialize the country, and sell all these things that now the world is, asking for. For example, Bolivia is the first reserves in lithium, and we understand that the world needs the lithium from Bolivia in order to sort the energy problem, the energy crisis that we are facing. So it's one of the issues that we can help as a country, but we need technology and we need capitals, money from enterprises, and we are trying to be helpful not only for ourselves but also for the world.
2023 marks the 10-year anniversary of China's Belt and Road Initiative. Bolivia is a big participant in that. I just want to get your thoughts as you look back on the past 10 years of Belt and Road and what you see for the future, especially Bolivia's part in all of that.
Yeah, we agree with the idea that China can, help all the countries to make better trades and much equal trades, I would say. I think China comes from a popular government where people's, is in the government, and from our point of view, it's a government that takes care of people, not only education, health, and other things. That is according to our way of thinking about how a government should develop a country. So we understand perfectly the idea behind. We understand why, the strategic view of China, which, represents many countries that are trying to make a different world, more equal world, and more justice in the world as well. So that's why I think it's very important.
President Arce, thank you for your time. We appreciate you being with us again.
My pleasure. Thank you.
Eliminating poverty is goal number 1 of the Sustainable Development Goals. We spoke with Wenyang Yang with the UN Department for Economic and Social Affairs about the challenges of meeting that goal. There's this overarching theme of leave no one behind. It's children that suffer the most. What are the biggest priorities in helping those kids?
Children is among what we say the most vulnerable and most marginalized segments of our society. The slogan of all the commitments, I should say, of leaving no one behind is leaving no children behind, leaving no women behind, leaving no person with disabilities behind, leaving no disadvantaged youth behind. So it's really a kind of broad, a broad vision that when we realize the 2030 agenda, nobody will be left behind, and children included.
We know that in recent years, China has lifted millions of people out of poverty. Talk about some of those measures, and are they things that other countries can also use and apply in their situations?
Well, when it comes to China, definitely, it's a huge success story that's recognized worldwide, everywhere. One is, I mentioned earlier, creating employment opportunities for people. And that's something China did right. The other element is that as China's economy grew, the government's actually committed to increasing social spending to provide basic social protection to all population. People need to be in good health, to be educated, right, to take advantage of those opportunities. And that's definitely something that I think all countries can do.
Any thoughts or anything you'd want people to know as the UN marks this day of awareness for poverty eradication?
People living in poverty are not just people that need to be helped. They are also agents of change, and their daily struggle is actually a contribution to our collective knowledge of what we can do to eradicate poverty, right? For eradication of poverty, we need government, national initiatives, national programs. At the same time, multilateral support, international cooperation is also a very important ingredient in our fight against poverty.
Ms. Yang, thank you so much for joining us.
Coming up,
30 million people who are living with HIV are on treatment today and living good lives around the world.
UN Insider.
Whether it's about your education, the home you live in, or the items you buy, your money has a story to tell. Because every business story is a human story. Global Business.
The world could be on the verge of a major victory in the fight against a decades-old epidemic. Winnie Byanyima is the executive director of UN AIDS, and she says we are closer than ever to eradicating AIDS. Ms. Byanyima, thank you so much for joining us.
Thank you for having me.
You appeared recently here in New York at the Clinton Global Initiative, and you had a message, and it was a message of encouragement that if we can stay the course, that we can end HIV infections by 2030. For some, that may sound somewhat ambitious, but it is a very optimistic message. And so I want you to tell us, how did we get to this point, and why are you so encouraged?
25 years ago, the world came together here at the United Nations and agreed. It was at the height of HIV, AIDS killing people. And they agreed as governments to come together and fight this together. They made a plan, they set targets, and every 5 years, they've met renewed targets. And here we are, 30 million people who are living with HIV are on treatment today and living good lives around the world. And that's the result of global solidarity. Rich countries put money down. Rich countries put money into companies to innovate and find the treatment. The treatment was costly at first. People living with HIV rose, fought hard, and companies were then pushed to share the technology. Generics were made. Now everyone, and prices came down, and everyone has what they need. We still have a way to go, though. 9 million people are still not on treatment. We're still pushing to get there.
Now, you have said that one of your big concerns right now is that there are so many crises around the globe that this issue might be dropping off the agenda a bit, just as you're starting to make progress and headway. What needs to be done to make sure that that doesn't happen and this issue remains at the forefront?
So we at UNAIDS are making this argument, and that's why we are here at this meeting of the General Assembly Summit of Heads of State. We're saying that fighting or working to end HIV/AIDS is preparedness for future pandemics. That the investment you make to fight HIV/AIDS today, all the things you do to stop infections, to stop deaths, the systems you build, the people you empower with capacities, all of that is what you will use to prevent a future pandemic or to respond if you're hit by it. So that's one. Two, also, when we fight HIV/AIDS, the things we do to protect against infection are also the things that achieve the other SDGs. Take, for example, in Africa, we know that girls and young women are the most vulnerable to have highest risk to get HIV. We know that the solution to that lies in one, keeping girls in school, at least up to the end of secondary school. When you do that, you don't only reduce the risk of HIV, you reduce the rate of teenage pregnancies, you reduce early marriage rates, you reduce the incidence of sexual violence, you also increase growth and you get a higher income for your country because you have women who are empowered.
Ms. Winnie Byanyima, thank you for joining us.
Thank you, too, for having me.
Climate change is a global fight, but smaller countries often feel a magnified impact when it comes to extreme weather events. I spoke with Costa Rican Foreign Minister Arnoldo Andre about his country's efforts to become more sustainable. Sustainable development goals have been a big topic here at the UN. We're almost to 2030. We're 7 years away. Which goals right now are in focus for Costa Rica, and where are you confident that you'll hit some of those goals by 2030?
The so-called ODS are very important for my country. We have integrated all these objectives into the National Development Plan, and each ministry has to deliver results on the implementation of each of the objectives. We strive for, together with the High Ambition Coalition for Nature and People, which is a group of more than 100 nations, here in the UN, we strive for a protection of 30% of the land, 30% of the ocean by the year 2030. And we have achieved that already.
How big of a concern has the recent climate events we've seen in other parts of the world, the extreme weather, impacted how you're looking at moving forward in reaching some of those goals that have to do with climate change?
Oh, it's imperative to work very much on adaptation to climate change. We are in Central America. We are in the Caribbean basin, where strong hurricanes hit our countries on one side. On the other side, the effect of the so-called El Niño effect has caused a lack of rain and lack of water in some of the parts of the country, affecting therefore very much the agricultural production. So we have to prepare ourselves for these events and further events that will come with a very strong climate change we're experiencing. You know, this year, 2023, has been the hottest year in humanity.
2023 marks the 10-year anniversary of China's Belt and Road Initiative. Costa Rica joined in 2018, and I just want to get your thoughts on how that has impacted Costa Rica's infrastructure and some of the projects that you have going because of it.
China and Costa Rica have celebrated 16 years of a diplomatic relationship. We are very happy with the relationship that over the 16 years have evolved and developed. And China, the Embassy of China is very present in many areas of the country. For instance, this year, up to last month, over 110 public servants have visited China in training programs that China has provided to our public servants in the very various areas. The Belt and Road Initiative started with one road, the road that links the capital to the Atlantic coast, to the port of Limón, and it's still under construction. That's the main infrastructure project that has been developed between the two countries.
Minister Andre, thank you so much for your time. We appreciate you joining us.
Oh, you are very welcome anytime.
Coming up.
What we want by 2030 is to achieve these goals, to see a world where there is no poverty, there isn't hunger, and where gender equality is being prioritized.
UN Insider.
We are CGTN, China Global Television Network.
Gender equality is one of the goals that is far behind its targets, but the UN is trying to change that. I sat down with Jeanette Escono, one of the authors of UN Women's Gender Snapshot Report. Jeanette, your findings in the Gender Snapshot when it comes to women and girls in the Sustainable Development Goals are actually pretty dire. What would you say are the biggest takeaways?
The situation currently is really dire. Across all of the goals, and what the report does is really look at gender equality across 17 global goals. And across them, we're seeing that women and girls are disadvantaged, are facing many, many challenges, whether it be increases in poverty that we've seen recently, increases in hunger, not the kinds of advancements that we want to see in terms of education outcomes, in terms of economic opportunities. And so we're not where we need to be in terms of gender equality.
But when you look across the world, that's not quite the case. What would you say to those who might be a little surprised to hear the findings?
What I'll say is that, you know, when you look across countries, you do see some progress. And so I don't want to sit here and say that there hasn't been any progress over the past 10, 20, 15 years. There has been progress. But what we say in the report is that progress has been too slow. It's been uneven. And what we want by 2030 is to achieve these goals, to see a world where there is no poverty, there isn't hunger, and where gender equality is being prioritized, where women and men are you know, facing the same kind of opportunities and life chances that they deserve.
I want to quote something from the report. If current trends continue, over 340 million women and girls will still live in extreme poverty by 2030. Progress will need to be 26 times faster to reach no poverty by 2030. So my question is that even possible? And how do you mobilize to even make progress going forward?
Yeah, I think it is possible. I think that we need to strive to reach these aspirational goals. I think that we can all agree that these are very aspirational, but this is what we all are trying to achieve collectively. And the way to do that is by addressing some of these challenges and making sure that we're implementing policies that make a difference. So let me give you an example. We know that social protection investment in social services can make a difference. Invest in those. We know that making sure that women have the same kinds of economic opportunities as men can make a difference in their economic independence, in their economic autonomy. And so making sure that policies are directed in that way to ensure that women and girls are advancing, that their well-being is shifting for the better over time.
How do we get more women into positions of power, leading boardrooms, leading companies, leading countries?
There are a number of ways. I think one key barrier is social norms that are still kind of gender biased and still see women as potentially not as great of a leader as a man. That is frankly not true. We have the evidence to back that up. And so part of what we need to be doing is changing some of those biased social norms that continue to impact the kind of progress that we're seeing on some of these issues. And then having really concrete policy interventions. We know that quotas, for example, can make a really big difference. Countries that have women leaders, heads of states, countries that, where we see that women are a greater share of parliamentarians, where they're a greater share of those making decisions at the local level, tend to have quotas and temporary special measures that are proactively ensuring that women are seated at those tables.
Jeanette, thank you so much for joining us.
Thank you.
I'm Elaine Reyes at UN headquarters in New York. Thanks for being a UN Insider.